Hello, boys and girls. This is Mr. Hordemeller for PE1 and PE2, and today we're going to go over the warm-up. We're going to try to answer 3 questions: the why, the how, and the where. And from there, just go into a general overview of what we're looking for when we go about our warm-up. So first and foremost, let's talk about why we want to warm up. Plenty of people, and I know myself when I was younger, you think the warm up, it's just not that important. I just want to get into my workout. That's where the fun is. That's where the heart of everything I'm trying to accomplish is. So let's just skip the warm up. Well, unfortunately, if you continue that, you will get yourself into basically either an injury, you'll get yourself where you aren't performing as well as you should, and you're just going into it cold. So the why to warm up is we want to prevent injury, we want to optimize performance, and we want to stimulate blood flow. Preventing injury, of course, should be at the forefront of everything we're trying to do. It doesn't matter if you're an athlete or somebody just engaging in health enhancing fitness, you do not want to be injured. That should go without saying. If you're injured, you're no longer able to continue working out, and it pretty much defeats itself. So we want to prevent injury, and we'll talk more about how the warm-up prevents injury in the next few slides. From there, we're talking about optimizing performance, which again, doesn't matter if you're an athlete or somebody just looking to engage in health-enhancing physical fitness, you want to perform at your best. Because if you go into your workout and you aren't performing at your best, you will not improve. It takes you fully applying yourself in any given workout in order to push the barrier and the boundary of what your body is capable of, thus promoting improvement. If you don't actually fully apply yourself, then you aren't getting the most out of your workout and you won't actually see the improvement or the results that you want to see. And if you go into a workout without properly warming up, you aren't optimizing your performance. And again, you're talking about being counterproductive. So it is counterproductive to go into a workout without properly warming up because you're just not ready in the same way. Then we talk about the stimulating blood flow. That is why it's traditionally called a warm-up, even though there are some people that want to refer to it as more of a movement preparation or other such labels, but we'll stick with a warm-up because it's what pretty much everybody calls it. And it's called a warm-up because you are literally warming up your muscles. As you activate and as the energy is being utilized and the exchange of nutrients happening at the muscle, there is a warmth to that. So we are getting our heart rate elevated. We are ensuring that proper nutrient flow is happening to the muscles where the exchange is needed and required. And all of that helps us during our workout. So those 3 reasons are the why it is, why to warm up. So how do you warm up? Well, we want to think about 3 different things. We want to think about stability, mobility, and neural activation. Stability, of course, as a definition, would be the ability of the surrounding musculature to stabilize major joints. From there, we can think about, well, of course, this is going to help us prevent injury, right? If I have to do a bench press and my shoulder joint is not properly stabilized when I go to move that bar, I'm probably going to tweak something or hurt something. So from that standpoint, to have stability in that joint allows me to have a nice platform from which to push. And of course, you could see the same apply in any sport-specific movement as well. You need a stable hip joint in order to kick a soccer ball far. You need stable pretty much everything in order to perform a baseball swing, and so on and so forth. So we want to ensure that our warm-up includes thoughts of getting that stability. From there, we talk about mobility, which would be the opposite end of the spectrum from stability. It would be the ability of a muscle to lengthen through an optimal range of motion. So if one end of the spectrum is stability, where there is no movement, the opposite end of the spectrum is mobility. And while it seems counterintuitive, we want to have both in an optimum balance. So we want to make sure that the muscle can still move while having that ability to be stable. The 2 types of mobility that we will talk about later in this try are passive and active mobility. But for today, for the purposes of our warm-up, we just need to think about getting those muscles some length, because length is strength. Most of the time, that's what people typically think about in a warm-up. Oh, I got to stretch. Got to do some stretching. Well, of course, in our warm-up, we are doing dynamic stretching, which is movement 10 seconds or less to get that muscle through a full and optimal range of motion and then bringing it back. Whereas static stretching would be getting a stretch and holding it. You might think of the sit and reach where you're holding that stretch, only then you would hold it for 10 seconds or longer. Maybe you would think about a yoga pose where you would get into a deep stretch and hold it for longer than 10 seconds. That would be a static stretch, and that is not something that we want to do during a warm-up. So again, during a warm-up, we want to dynamically stretch. We want to lengthen our muscle through an optimal range of motion. That way, not only do we have the ability to prevent injury through mobility, but we also have the ability to optimize performance because length is strength. Lastly, on how do we go about warming up is neural activation. This goes into optimizing our performance, but of course, all of this is tied pretty well closely. If you're optimizing your performance, you're also going to, chances are, prevent injury because you're working at your fullest possible capacity. And if you're working at your fullest possible capacity, you had to have a proper neural connection. That is your brain's ability to fully and neurally activate the muscle. If your brain isn't fully firing and telling the muscle to fully activate, then you are missing out on that optimizing your performance. So again, we think about that brain activating the muscle, that mind-body connection. And if you aren't focusing on that during the warm-up, then chances are you're not fully getting that engagement during your workout. The definition for neural activation, for our purposes, we will just simply say it's the brain's ability to maximally innervate and activate muscles. So that is the how do I warm up? I want to make sure I'm thinking about stability. I want to make sure I'm thinking about mobility. And I want to make sure I'm thinking about my neural activation. Lastly, let's talk about where am I applying this to? So the three areas of our body combine together to be commonly referred to as the pillar. I have the shoulders, I have the hips, and I have the torso. Shoulders and hips are major joints. They are the ball and socket joints that provide a lot of movement. So, of course, it's easy to think about mobility. I want to make sure I have tons of mobility in my shoulders, whether or not I'm doing a spike in volleyball or an overhand serve in tennis. I'm going to need lots of shoulder mobility for that. Or if I'm, trying to do a bench press again, like I talked about, I want to make sure I have stability in the shoulders. So that would be a primary joint through which upper body movements flow. Hips, then, of course, on the bottom side would be the primary joint from which most lower body movements flow. Again, whether or not it's the soccer kick, like I said earlier, or any other lower body movement that you can think about. Hips are another thing that we want to fully think about. The torso, then, what some people would call the core, is responsible for not only stabilizing, but also transferring force between the upper and lower body. It's also responsible for rotational forces, for anti-rotational forces. The core really does a lot for our body, but we want to think about it as the link between the shoulders and the hips. Most movements, if they are just upper body, chances are you have a link to the ground. So, for example, if I'm an offensive lineman in football and I'm trying to push somebody away from my quarterback, I have to have that lower body grounded connection. My hips need to be nice and strong. The core needs to be able to transfer that force from my hips up into the shoulders, and then my shoulders need to be able to exert that force. So all three of those things are linking and working together to accomplish my sports-specific task. And even if I'm not an athlete and I'm trying to engage in health-enhancing fitness, my lifestyle, chances are I'm going to need to have all three of these items fully functional and operational in order to be able to go about my life in the best and most optimal way possible. So again, shoulders, hips, and torso. And as we go through our warm-up, hopefully we can observe and realize what areas are targeted by each, but I'll try to give you a little bit of a heads up, saying this, of course, is good for the torso, hips, shoulders. That's why we're doing this. Trying to get some mobility here, some stability there. Wanting to, of course, ensure that we're getting our neural activation to all of it. So that is the where to warm up. So we've talked about why do I warm up? We want to make sure we're optimizing our performance. We want to make sure we're preventing injury. We want to make sure we're stimulating blood flow. We've talked about how to warm up. We want to make sure we're focusing on something that's going to get us stability, something that's going to get us mobility, and something that's going to get that neural activation to the muscles. And we want to make sure we're accomplishing this at our shoulders and our hips and our torso. So that way all major aspects of our primary movements are going to be covered. that is the warm up in a nutshell. So hopefully, if you are in PE2, this was mostly a review. If you are in PE1, this should be new to you. And again, hopefully you are accountable to this information, as there will be quizzes and exams on it later. Thank you.